Yan, nandyan pa ba kayo? Sabi ko nga, mag-meta tayo soon. Gising tayo until mga 2-3 a.m. Kanina dito sa, of course, Europe time, continental Europe time. Natulog lang tayo ng sandali. Pag gising natin, ayan na, invasion. Invasion na talaga. This is it. Putin did it. Putin did it. Tama talaga si Biden. Tama yung sinabi ni Biden na Putin made the decision talaga to invade Ukraine. And mukhang all the way na yan eh. Base sa mga reports na pumapasok ngayon, this is a multi-front attack. Yan, na-predict din ng Amerika yan. And yun nga eh. So, multiple places right now are under attack. Kiev, Kharkiv, Kramatorsk, Dnipro, Kherson, even Odessa, right? On the Black Sea coast. And as you know, Odessa is a very special place in Russian history dahil nga yung cultural heartland ng Kievan Rus, no, ay galing sa Kiev, sa parts ng Ukraine. So yeah, it's happening. So mukhang tamang-tama yung yung deep intel ni Putin, ni Biden. At if you bother to watch yung recent video ni Putin dressing down his intel chief, yung parang pinapahiya niya yung intel chief niya. Ano ang sabi mo? Bilisan mo nga, yung ginaganon-ganon lang niya. I mean, that tells you about the situation of decision making there in Russia right now, in Kremlin. That also tells you siguro medyo pissed off si Putin kasi mukhang na-infiltrate ng Amerika yung upper echelons of decision making. So may advanced knowledge ng US na talagang decision has been made at hindi ito bluff lang. So hindi lang ito wild guess by Biden to come out and multiple times that the decision has been made. Mukhang meron silang inside information at the highest levels at that may have pissed off Putin and may partly explain bakit Putin was dressing down his intel chief the way he did, like a pupil bullying a pasaway student. I'm sorry, like a teacher bullying a pasaway pupil, no? So this is actually the opposite of what happened in Afghanistan, because in Afghanistan, sobrang mali yung intel ng US, as in sobrang mali. So US was expecting that the Western government in Kabul would last weeks, if not months, after withdrawal of US troops, but hindi pa nga nag-withdraw ang US troops. Tapos ng laban. Talaga nag-collapse yung whole system in Afghanistan. So I think this time really there was pressure on Biden administration na not to underestimate the situation and not to get it wrong. Now, dun sa mga gusto nilang malaman, oh, by the way, Russia denied on multiple occasions they want to invade and they said na purong mga military exercises lang yan. So yung mga iba dyan na kunyari, alam na nila noon pa. I'm sorry, huwag kayong mag-feeling dyan. So, remember, there were supposed to be military exercises in Belarus until February 20. And sabi ng Russia, ay ano lang, exercises lang yan. Alisin namin yan mamaya. And then, of course, they didn't do that. Now, interestingly, another aspect we have to look at. Now, dun sa mga gusto malaman about the background and the intel, research niyan. Few years ago, actually, the US was also able to extract a top intel officer dun sa loob, no? ng decision-making process in Moscow. Nasa Amerika na yung tao na yan. So may history na tayo ng US infiltration, no? And of course, this goes all in all directions. But anyways, going back to this, the other thing we have to keep in mind is the China angle. This did not happen during the Beijing Olympics, Winter Olympics, which is quite different from what happened in 2008. So this is not the first time na ang Russia ay sumugod sa ibang bansa. In 2008 in Georgia, no, nag-invade po ang Russia on the pretext of protecting ethnic minority groups in Abkhazia and Ossetia, right? This is in the Caucasus region. But that coincided with the Beijing Olympics. 2014 Olympics in Sochi, Winter Olympics, nangyaring intervention at annexation of Crimea, no. This time medyo malapit sa Olympics pero mukhang hinintay ni Putin, and probably that's in deference and respect to Xi Jinping, because Xi Jinping really wanted to make a big deal out of this Olympics to show that China is all well and strong and can host events in, with perfection, Chinese style precision. So Putin talagang hinintay niya. So it was really on the I think 21st or just right after natapos yung Olympics in China, na nag-sign ng decree si Putin na i-recognize na yung mga rebel-held areas, no, sa pinaka-eastern parts ng Ukraine, no. But now, few days later, it's very clear that an all-out invasion was really the plan all along. And I'll tell you, in Munich, when I had conversations with some of the top experts, and even my sense is, even conversations with top diplomats, even if you look at the statements of the German foreign minister, among others, I think a lot of them were hoping that this is just a big bluff. That this is just parang gunboat diplomacy. Yung ginagawa ng West dati na binubuli niya ibang bansa, yung magpadala sila ng isang gunboat sa Tokyo, no? Edo back then, and ibuli nila yung Japan, no, to open up their trade, or yung mga ginawa nila sa China, sa iba't ibang bansa, 'di ba? Yun ang bullying ng ginawa ng mga Europeo, 'di ba? Sa ating mga Asyano back in the day. So many thought that this is like a Russian version of gunboat diplomacy. In this sense, of course, put huge army on the borders of a country close to the West, not to mention also deploying naval forces dyan sa Black Sea, in Crimea area, and by that essentially cajole, no, pressure the West to concede to Russia. Of course, yung request ni Putin, among others, is to make sure that Ukraine will never join the NATO, and I think by extension also the European Union. The explanation of Putin is that they're threatened by NATO. I mean, to a certain degree, you understand the guy, because NATO has been expanding from Poland in 1999, Central Europe, all the way to the Balkans, and even parts of Black Sea, no? So Romania, North Macedonia, all of these countries are now part of NATO. So for Putin, that's a big no-no. But, Ukraine is an interesting and special and tragic case, because there's no indication that Ukraine will be a member of NATO anytime soon. And yung issue ni Putin about deployment of missiles that can always be negotiated and renegotiated, and anyways, NATO has all those missiles along Poland, Hungary, and a lot of those countries. I don't think moving them into Ukraine in a very hypothetical situation would have dramatically changed the situation, because after all, let's get the facts right. Russia has the biggest arsenal of nuclear missiles on Earth, right? If anyone messes with Russia, they're done, right? There's gonna be a nuclear war, right? So Russia is not a basa-basa lang ang Russia, no? Humina sila economically a lot, demographically a lot, politically a lot, sure. But they have a huge arsenal of nuclear weapons. At what you will have is a situation of mutually assured destruction. The NATO will not dare to attack Russia without willing to risk a nuclear warfare or showdown. That's the situation there. So I see where the argument could come from na ang NATO po ay nag-overexpand. I mean, that's the argument that John Mearsheimer and a lot of Western analysts are making, na NATO was a little bit mayabang. They took advantage of humiliation of Russia and all. But the point is, should the concerns of Russia be addressed at the expense of invading and destroying Ukraine? I mean, tayo bilang Pilipino, maliit tayong bansa, or relatively maliit, actually hindi tayo ganun kaliit. 120 million tayo almost, di ba? But, as a non-power, as a non-major power, hindi ba dapat mas gets natin yung situation ng Ukraine? No? Kasi ito na nga ipit sila sa gitna ng dalawang higante. So instead of taking sides of one higante against the other, right? Which is sadly what I'm seeing there. A lot of people there like as if parang kawawa yung Russia lang. And they tend to forget what's happening to Ukraine, right? Yun yung masaklap to hear a lot of Filipinos showing to hear some people there showing no compassion, sympathy whatsoever for Ukraine. It's all about, what about Russia? I understand. But you can talk even to a lot of Russian experts inside Russia, people from the Carnegie, people in the top newspapers, and a lot of them had second thoughts about it. They're not very happy about this situation. They're worried, but they cannot talk because we know the situation, right? So ako naman, wala akong pake dun sa mga superpowers. Ang concern ko Ukraine kasi ipit sila dito kawawa sila Ukraine used to have nuclear weapons, but they gave it up after the end of Cold War. Itong mga Westerner na yan, pinangakuan sila na, okay, if you do that, you'll be okay, blah, blah, blah. But now, they're completely vulnerable to Russia. Kaya nga talagang kailangan you have your own capabilities also. Huwag kang umasa sa ibang bansa lang. And in the case of Ukraine, it seems, Russia really wanted to make sure that Ukraine will remain kind of like a province of Russia. Kind of a, diba, yung parang gustong gawin ng China dun sa mga ibang bansa dyan, diba? So, this has a lot of parallels. And let me tell you this, I mean, ako, syempre pinanak tayo dun sa twilight years of Cold War, lumaki tayo sa post-Cold War period. So, I think, lumaki ako with the perception ng Europe po ay a continent of peace and stability, and Elysium in a world of instability. Nakita natin yung giyera in the Middle East. Sorry, talagang grabe. Nakikita niyo eyebags and all. I mean, I keep on updating my pieces. I write something, biglang outdated na in 12 hours. I mean, like, this is insane. So I just try to get some sleep. Wala nang food. Wala na akong kinain since last night. This is, so, ang point ko lang talaga dito is, marami akong points. No? I'm just trying to communicate the gravity of the situation. This is just not another war. We have seen in Europe a supposed Elysium of peace. Even here, mukhang hindi natapos ang usapan gera at saka machtpolitik, no? Yung bully-bullyan, no? Muscle politics, no? Power politics, no? And that's really worrying, because if this can happen in Europe, imagine anong pwede mangyari sa Asia, no? Kung saan ang dami natin mga frozen conflicts, North Korea, South Korea, Cold War time pa yan. Taiwan, China, of course, malapit sa atin yung Taiwan. Yung South China Sea, my goodness, anong gagawin ng China yan? Diyan, yun nga eh, this opens up a whole can of worms. Parang nawala na yung mga uncertainties ng past. If any country can just invade another smaller country na walang power by just coming up with whatever reason, then rule of jungle na po yan, di ba? Rule of jungle na yan. At nakakatakot yung ganyan situation. Kaya nga nagpapanik na talaga yung the West, kasi the whole global order now is at stake eh. May sinabi si Thucydides or Thucydides, depending on how you want to pronounce it, the Greek historian on the Peloponnesian War, Sparta, Athens, among others. Sabi niya, the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. No? And this is based on the very, very tragic experiences of invasion of smaller city-states by the bigger powers in the Greek world back in the ancient era. And that's exactly what we want to avoid. We don't want a world whereby the strong do whatever they want and the weak have no choice but to suffer it. Ayaw natin bumalik sa mundong yan. Kaya nga, this is what at stake here. Because ang Ukraine boy, yes, hindi siya member ng EU, hindi siya member ng NATO, but clearly, huge parts of Ukraine, Kiev, much of the west of the country, they want to be part of Western alliance. They want to be part of the West. They want democracy. They want to be part of NATO and enjoy the collective security. And they're being punished. I mean, the word punish is not even, it's an understatement for that aspiration. And you had all of these warnings that there will be massive sanctions among others, and yet boom, still this is happening. Which brings me to the next issue, no? Kasi ang daming pwedeng pag-usapan dito eh. The other thing we have to understand is also the decision-making process. When people say Russia thinks this, let's be very clear. Putin thinks that way, right? We don't have any credible evidence to suggest that majority of Russians are behind this. In fact, a lot of reports suggest that majority of Russians thought maybe this is just a bluff or escalation. So I'm sure a lot of our Russian friends are also very worried with the situation right now. At of course, para sa kanila, malapit ang puso nila sa mga Ukrainians. But there are lots of Russians in Ukraine, and Ukrainians have very many similarities with Russians. They're not the same exactly, but there are a lot of similarities. So ito parang breath rin ang tingin nila dyan, no? Let me go back to this issue, because this is a boring thing. So Putin has been in power for almost 20 years now. At sabi nila, power tends to corrupt and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. And when you're 21 years yung isa, of course. But when you're 20 years in power, that really does something to you. I mean, Putin is a very smart guy. We know his background, his training and all. But when you're 20 years in power, everyone is just yes man around you. No one dares to challenge you except some few activists or Navalny, etc. It does something to you. You create a kind of a cocoon, a kind of silo. And you'll have a warped no sense of reality. And let me give you some background on this, because minention ko yan, ipopost ko sa baba yung analysis ko for Inquirer, among others, earlier this week. Na sabi ko, we're in a deadlock. And when you have a situation of deadlock, when no one can back down without losing face. So, Russia cannot just withdraw troops and say, ay, bluff lang yan. The West cannot just say, ay, sorry, sige, sa inyo na yung Ukraine. Ukraine cannot say, ay, wag na, sige, hindi na kami nag-join sa NATO, we'll just give up the... No one was blinking eh. So, ayan tayo. And when you have that situation, hardliners have the upper hand. And the worry here is the rise of these hawks and new conservatives in Russia, who have been very influential in shaping the policy of Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine over the past 8 years or so. So ito yung mga tinatawag ng Siloviki. No? A lot of these people are coming from military intelligence background. Kasama dyan si Nikolai Patrushev, Sergei Narishkin, and Sergei Shoigu. No? So this trio of hawks have been very, very influential, and their views on Ukraine is pretty extreme for a lot of observers. And the sense is, these are the people who, together with Putin, thought, roll the dice. Let's go. Boom. And from here, it's just a question of how bad can things get. Things are going to things will get worse and worse and worse. So now, obviously, there's pressure on the West to impose really harsh sanctions. So I'm almost certain that Russia will be kicked out of the SWIFT banking system. So it will be very hard for Russians, Russian banks, Russian businessmen to conduct international transactions. It's also very possible that there will be also industrial technological sanctions. Baka hindi na pwede gumamit ng Microsoft, I don't know, Tesla, whatever, yung mga American or Western technology ang Russia. And that will make Russia very dependent on China. Very, very dependent on China. And I'm not sure that's the best thing for Russia, because Russia wants to be an independent, autonomous power on its own terms. So speaking of that, in a way, China may benefit from the situation because it will bog down the West in Europe. It will make the Indo-Pacific strategy of Biden much more difficult. It sets a very dangerous precedence, which can be used also against Taiwan in the case of China. Although Taiwan is a very different case, we'll discuss that separate. I've written on that. I'll post my article on that the two are very different. Yung kakayahan ng Taiwan, yung preparedness ng Taiwan, yung level of security cooperation between US and Taiwan is very different from the case of Ukraine. Ukraine was a Soviet member until 1990s, right? Okay, so let's be very clear. Taiwan used to have a mutual defense treaty with the US and now has something just short of that, right? Which is the Taiwan Relations Act. It's not a mutual defense treaty, but it's something significant. But if you're also China, you can also benefit by seeing a Russia that is more dependent on you. So China will have more leverage in getting most advanced Russian technology, especially in the military front, because Russia doesn't have much of an advanced technology in the civilian realm. Pero sa military, malakas pa rin ng Russia, fifth generation fighters, hypersonic missile systems, etc. Although China has already moved also significantly on that front, partly thanks to Russian technology that they probably copied and all. Not to mention the blueprints of F-35 and others they may have gotten from the US side. But if you're also China, you're not necessarily very happy with this, because China is a rising power, time is on their side, at ang gusto ng China overall is stability, because the more stable the situation is, the more they can grow, and the bigger they get, it's easier for them to just say to the others, wag na kayo lumaban, sumali na kayo sa amin, diba? So actually time is on China's side. So if you're China, you want to minimize uncertainty and instability as much as possible. And as much as China may get benefits from a weaker partner in Russia, a weak partner is not a good partner, right? You want to have a strong partner that can help you to reshape the global order. So a weak Russia, economically weak Russia, diplomatically isolated Russia will leave China more on its own, as the other superpower. And that will, and yun nga kasi gustong mag-alliance yung dalawa. In fact, Putin and Xi Jinping, I think, are just 6 months apart. They're same batch, almost literally, So siguro kung na high school sila in the same place, they would have been batchmates, But now, maging weaker and weaker ang Russia because of this situation. Yes, they're military strong, but okay, let me end on this point because we'll have more discussion soon. Hopefully there's more updates coming and I'll try to get back to writing. Hindi nga ako makakonsentrate kasi grabe. Parang hindi totoo eh. Alam mo yun ang mangyayari. Nakikita mo naman sa mga sinusulat natin. But at the same time, parang, yun talaga, parang what? Diba? So yun, bago tayo bumalik dyan, oh yeah, let's go to Ukraine. Because yun nga bilang mga Pilipino, mga people from small countries, siguro mas dapat maintindihan natin yung case ng Ukraine na ipit sa gitna na maliit na bansa na limitado yung kanilang capabilities, no? And the Ukrainians will fight back. Sure, conventional capability, Russia is way ahead of them, but Ukraine has 200,000 troops. And even if those troops melt away, like they did back in 2014, which I doubt will be exactly the same case, they have learned a lot, they have improved a lot. There'll be resistance. There'll be resistance in large parts of the country. There could be urban warfare. A lot of Russians could move to the western parts of the country and launch guerrilla warfare there. And they're going to get armaments, support, financial backing from places like Poland, all of Baltic states, yung mga katabi nila. It will be a proxy war against Russia. NATO versus Russia via Ukraine. And the Ukrainians will fight back. A lot of them will fight back. Not maybe the Russian-speaking or pro-Russian parts of Ukraine, the east side of the Dnieper, but the west side, maybe Kiev, a lot of them will fight back. I don't know how long they can hold it in Kiev. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to get more updates on this, but this is really an evolving situation. But